Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shock Talk. Today, we're going to focus on a majorly overlooked vehicle, I think, the tow vehicles. And as always, today we have Shane and Junior with me, my companions always, and we have Garrett working the cameras and the sound, and our faithful leader, Chelsea, over there, making sure we don't goof up too bad. But so tow vehicles, most folks, you know, they take great care of their race car. They take great care of their quads or their side-by-sides or their dirt bikes or whatever they're putting on the trailer.
Quads.
But the truck that hauls it there, it might need some help. So let's talk about some common mods that we might do for tow vehicles.
But do people still ride quads?
I don't think so. I kind of threw mine in the garbage a few days ago.
Mine's been collecting dust.
Exactly. What do you think?
But yes, back in the day,
Yeah.
we used to tow our quads.
We used to tow those too. So
in the toy hauler.
yeah. But it
Out to
doesn't
the
matter.
desert.
Could be a boat, could be a quad, could be
Yep.
jet skis. I don't even know if they make those anymore. Yeah, three-wheelers too. Or, gosh.
Wait,
really
that's
going
way back in the day.
But they're coming back into style, man. The people want these vintage Hondas, and they're
Yeah.
out there with
Restoration.
those balloon tires
Yep.
and just loving life.
And guess what all those people need? A tow.
A tow
Something to
vehicle,
tow.
yeah.
Tow vehicle.
And, you know, it doesn't have to be a desert toy, right? It could really be anything. It could be a big trailer. It could be a small trailer. It could be a big truck or a small truck. We were just talking with one of our
Or
coworkers.
it doesn't even have to be a truck.
Yeah, we were just talking to one of our coworkers that used to tow with his 79 Courier, right? Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
It could be a fifth wheel. It could be a tow behind.
It
Yeah.
could
So,
be-
what are some common mods that we would want
Well,
to do?
what about the people now that are towing with CUVs?
Absolutely.
These overlanders that are towing with these
Little teardrops?
independent rear suspension CUVs
Yeah.
that, you know, I think my take on it is I would rather be over trucked and overcarred than under trucked. So if I need to tow 10,000 pounds consistently, I'm not going to buy a vehicle that has a 10,000 pound tow rate.
No.
No, and that's the thing about the half tons.
Right.
They all
Correct.
say they'll
Yeah.
tow
12,000 pounds,
Yeah.
10, 12,000 pounds, but they
won't.
they
Motor and
will,
clutch.
they
Motor and
will
clutch.
once a
Yeah.
year maybe,
Yeah.
if you're doing it like down the block. But
Right.
consistently is tough on them, you know what
Like
I mean?
if you're in the Midwest and you have like a
Zero
big
grade.
farm,
Yeah.
right? And you're like Daryl Bays, right? You got like a farm and you maybe it's a mile long and you tow
Yeah.
for like a mile. You
Yeah.
can do it.
Right.
But consistently, the chassis is just not. It's just not designed for it. It's just not heavy enough, right? It's and especially with most of these guys transitioning to coil sprung rear ends on half ton trucks, it's just like
Well, transmissions, clutches, things like that, they're not designed for all
everything
that
from
way too.
everything. Yeah, but you got tow package half ton trucks that have external oil coolers, trans coolers, all this stuff, but it doesn't change the fact that the chassis is at its limitations.
And the springs.
Yeah.
Spring.
Yeah. Well, tow it up banner grade and
Well,
see how well it does.
Well, like a half ton truck with a leaf spring is really like kind of designed for comfort these days. It's
Right.
kind of like the family
Right.
truckster.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, how long before GM transitions to coil springs? It can't be that long.
Right.
And then it's
I
gonna
mean,
get,
Dodge
yeah.
did it in 09 on the half tons. Then in 14, they did it on the 2500. Now Ford's doing it on the F-150.
Yeah.
So Tundra's doing it on the Tundra.
Tundra just started
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's not long before everything's going to be 5-link on a half ton side.
on a half ton, yeah. But even the leaf springs are, they're pretty soft on the half tons because
Right.
they're really supposed to be comfortable.
Well, I guess that's probably a good place to start. So let's talk about the different vehicle classes. We kind of have been doing that already. But so we've been talking half tons, 1 tons, 3/4 tons. So maybe let's start there. So most people, when they select a tow vehicle, like Junior said, if they're going to be heavy hauling all the time, they're looking for the big 1-ton haulers. Now, what's a typical setup on a vehicle like that?
Let's even start
Further back?
further back. So
Okay.
just like qualifying your off-road needs and what you're going to be doing with the vehicle, whether you should get a solid axle or IFS, is the same way you need to qualify yourself on the tow side.
Right.
If you have a single axle trailer that's 7,500 pounds dry and you're 3,000 pounds away from your max tow capacity, that truck's going to be able to handle it. Right.
Right,
You could
right.
take any half ton today and tow a single axle 7,500 pound, whatever it may be.
Right.
But when you start getting into the dual axle, and it's now 10,000 pounds dry Can you do it with a half ton? Absolutely. Should you? No, you shouldn't do it with a half.
Right.
Well, a half ton's just going to get sucked down by the back.
Yeah,
Especially
and you're
if
not
it's a
going to get
tow
any
behind.
better mileage because the thing's struggling.
And under brakes and
Yeah, and then you get caught in the crosswinds with a half ton truck towing a dual axle trailer like a Airstream or something. It's like not it. I'm going to use a word that Mike loves. It becomes unsafe really fast.
Right. And that's really, I mean, we didn't want to start there, but that's where we're going to end up is with how to really try to make the vehicle a little safer when you're towing with it.
And it's unfortunate because back in the 2000s, early 2000s, late 90s, remember when you would go to U-Haul or you would go to a place and get a trailer hitch put on, they would turn you away if you were towing a certain amount of weight with that vehicle. Now they don't care. It's like as long as you got the $349 for this hitch and the 4 bolts, we're putting it on there.
Yeah.
Whatever you tow is up to you. So you find these first generation Nissan Pathfinders going down the freeway with a dual axle Airstream on them, and I'm like, oh my God.
How are you going to stop that? Yeah.
I see a lot of JKs with some stuff they shouldn't be towing.
Right.
Especially Gladiators, man.
Right.
I see a
think
lot
it's
of
a truck,
Gladiators. Yeah, and it's like, dude.
I mean, it says you can do 7,500 with a Gladiator, but you probably shouldn't.
You should not.
Like maybe you should tow like a UTV
Right.
or like a light boat.
Right.
But like
I mean, that was the
RV
To put it in
Yeah.
perspective, there's really, it's like I met with a customer today, a guy that does our propane here, and he had some truck questions on his truck. He has an 80 PSI tire on there, but the cold tire pressure from the manufacturer in there is 80 PSI. So what does that do to the tire? Starts separating the steel belts. Because now your cold pressure 80, you jump on the freeway, that air gets hot, it's going to expand. Now you're at what, 90 PSI, 87 PSI? So you're maxed out. You don't want... The automotive manufacturer will tell you that it's fine to max it out. From a safety standpoint and from a standpoint of the vehicle doing what you want it to do, don't max it out. Here's the thing. You're towing an 11,000 pound trailer. You're in an F-150 EcoBoost that has a 12,000 pound tow rating. You tow that thing from here to Vegas. You know you're towing.
Oh yeah.
You're fighting that thing to get it up the banner grade. You're fighting that thing to get it back up through Prim. If you would have had an F-250
with a diesel,
you could have had a conversation,
right,
and you wouldn't have been white knuckling
it to get there.
You know what I mean? So I guess it's a matter of.
Well, let's talk about that. You got a half ton. That's the problem with the half tons. They have soft springs.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of work you got to put into the springs.
Well, they have soft springs because let's talk about
comfort.
why.
It's comfort. Yeah.
Because they're
Right?
trucksters.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're family trucksters. Instead of getting a minivan, you just get an F-150, right?
Right.
And even in my opinion, even 3/4 ton, 1 ton trucks now they ride better than ever.
More for comfort.
They do, but they're not.
But
like
they're
a
still
half ton,
rigid. Yeah, you're right.
You know.
So let's say if you're one of these people that bought the F-150 for a family truckster and you are thinking about hauling a 2-axle Airstream, what would be some things that you could do to make that tow safer? What would you address?
Drive it on a Saturday morning right back into Ford and get an F-250.
Well, I'm afraid there's already people
Here's
who have
the deal.
that vehicle.
No matter how much you invest in a half ton, it's never going to tow like a 3/4 or a 1 ton.
Right.
The chassis will not allow it. So you can
Right.
have airbags, Timrins, you can have onboard air compressor, you can have whatever you want. That half ton will never tow like a 3/4 ton.
Right.
And the 3/4 ton nowadays, like the Dodge Ram, we just had this conversation.
Yeah.
Dodge Ram 3/4 ton's not going to ever tow like a Dodge 1 ton.
Right.
Dodge 1 ton still has leafs in there.
Right.
You know, the leaf pack is probably taller than you.
Yeah, it is. I actually stood
So-
next to one.
It's just and for those that have the truck and then now are gonna so there's a thing, you know, a lot of times we tell you to qualify your needs. A lot of times it's backwards. So you have a truck and then you want a trailer. So now it's like now you
Right.
have to make use
Right.
of what
Then you're
you have.
in it.
Yeah.
Then you're buying all kinds of products.
That's when you need to start understanding the capability of the vehicle.
Right.
Right. And now you have to alter your wants on the trailer side to make the vehicle do its job.
Right.
Yeah, but let's face it, most of the people just get the trailer.
Right.
And then they deal with it later.
Yeah, they build up the truck, in which cases they're going to address things. They're going to use supplemental airbags or Timrin, these poly bumper things to make the vehicle
I would
tow
start.
better.
So what I would start with, honestly, is over anything added to the spring pack, because anytime you add something to the leaf springs, typically you're only towing once a month, once a quarter. So my thought is you're best off getting something like a weight distribution hitch.
Right.
That's
Right.
the first step. Yeah.
Which really
That's the
helps.
first step, because the more you add to the actual vehicle in the way of Timrin bushings, airbags,
You're changing
air
the
springs.
daily ride characteristics.
Correct. So now when the trailer's off, you're going to have some, because you got to keep at least 3 to 5 PSI in those bags, keep them
Right.
lubricated.
Right.
So you'll still have a different characteristic and overall feel of the vehicle.
Right.
You will. But I mean, like, realistically, you want that thing to be at least level, because a lot of times with half tons, you're going to pick up the front,
Right.
and that's really going to...
Difficult to
And you'll
steer,
be
difficult
surprised
to
what
stop.
weight distribution does.
So explain
I
that.
know that
That's-
helps. It does help
Yeah,
a
that's
lot.
something I'm curious about. So I've heard a lot about these. I've never actually used one. What does that product do? How does it achieve what
Well,
it says?
I mean, clearly, if you guys are watching, you know that I'm no professional at weight distribution, clearly. But I think what it does is it takes the preload, it takes your tongue weight
Right.
and gets tongue weight off it. So say you have 1,000 pounds of tongue weight. Now you put it on a weight distribution hitch, you're pushing that tow what you're towing back further.
Right.
So it creates less tongue weight,
Less leverage. Yep.
less tongue weight.
Yep.
Correct. So now before I couldn't lift this trailer and
Right.
pull it. Now with the weight distribution on there, I can lift it and relocate
nice,
it. It just lightens up
The tongue.
the
Right.
tongue.
Oh, that's good. That to me seems like one of the best things
Yeah,
to do.
but it also creates, what a lot of people don't like is it creates length, right? It creates length to your whole,
toe assembly. Yeah.
now whether it's, you can't see out of your tow mirrors or whether you can't. And that's another thing that a lot of people, now that we're talking about towing, a lot of people say they don't need tow mirrors. If you're towing, put a tow mirror
Yeah,
on there.
exactly. So be able to see
Not
the back
even
of the
for
trailer.
your safety.
Yeah.
If you don't want to do it, just do it for the safety of other people driving on the street.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a guy with no tow mirrors and assumes he can make it, and then sees the car when the car now is in view of his regular mirror, he jerks the wheel and then the
Right.
trailer goes all, I mean, I see it all the time.
Right. Yeah, that's true. You have to make sure you have all of the safety accessories if you're gonna try to do that.
Weight distribution hitch does work really good, but you need to have a pretty heavy trailer, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you're not going to put that on a boat.
No, I mean most of
No,
the time
especially like a galvanized trailer with a little.
it's tongue weight.
Yeah.
You'd have
Like,
to calculate
You
tongue
need like an RV trailer. It's 8,000 pounds.
And how the weight
7,000
was
pounds.
But that's how I would
Relax.
start
Yeah.
in an effort not to compromise the overall ride quality
Right.
when I'm not towing.
Right.
Right? Would be weight
Yeah.
distribution.
So you have that.
Well, let's touch on that. That's always comes up. When I'm towing, I did all this stuff, and now it sucks.
Right.
When
Oh,
I'm
all
not
the
towing,
time.
The ride's
right?
horrible. Yeah.
Like that's like a big question we always get.
Yeah.
Now
how far do you change it?
there's a difference now.
No matter what.
So
car
you
it is.
can use weight distribution on a bumper pull.
Right.
You can't use weight distribution on a fifth wheel.
Right.
So now you have a fifth wheel, and you have all that tongue weight essentially right over your axle.
Right.
So now that's axle weight directly. Now you have no choice but to either buy the correct truck or
Start
Try to
adding
figure out,
airbags,
yeah.
leaf springs, things like this to level it out. So since we actually work for a shock absorber manufacturer, what is the shock's role in all this when we start doing these mods? How does the shock play into this? Now we start adding accessories, we're changing the spring rate. How does that affect what we do as far as a damper manufacturer? I mean,
well, typically a shock absorber is there to dampen the kinetic spring energy, right?
Right.
And most of the on the rear of a leaf sprung truck, I would say that you have 20%, 15% either way of increasing spring rate. Would you say, Shane? 15%?
leeway
10%?
in the change of spring
It's
rate.
hard to say how they're adding.
Yeah.
It.
So yeah, and then another way is how the spring flattens. So now you have all these manufacturers that make stolastic shackles to try to get the ride more
Right.
Make all,
Right.
There's so many products out there.
So many
Exactly.
products out there to try to soften the blow. And you know
Well, this is what I'm thinking is so the person addresses all the spring-related issues in their tow package, if you will, right? But the damper, they leave the factory twin tube damper on there, and now they're wondering why the truck rides horrible loaded and unloaded, right?
Well, let's touch on that. So,
Well,
BILSTEIN,
let's touch on this first before we get into that.
hey,
Don't buy a 1-ton truck if you don't tow things that a 1-ton truck's needed.
Yes, this was a big.
I think the most annoying email to get is, hey,
or phone call. Yes.
hey guy,
Chief.
hey chief, I just bought a Ram 3500
and it rides horrible.
and my wife won't ride with me in it because it rides terrible. You didn't test drive this thing before you bought it? Do you tow? No, we once in a while throw a couple barrels of hay in the back. Perfect. Like the consumer's expectation has to be within reach. So you can't expect $100 shock to solve your
Absolutely,
problem.
yeah.
Will our shock change the characteristic? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, over freeway transitions and concrete to asphalt transitions in the road, our shock will keep the tire on the ground. However, it's not going to make that 3500 drive like a 50.
Well, this is a case where the
Never.
person went the opposite
Never,
way,
ever
right?
will.
So someone bought more vehicle than they needed. They're never going to tow, right? We started talking about the person who bought less vehicle than they needed, and now they're trying to build it up.
Well,
So what was your point?
that's why the Ram 2500 is kind of a good option
In the middle, yeah.
in the middle.
Yeah.
You can't really put a lot in the back. You can't. I think you can tow a lot.
But you can tow a lot. But it's a 5-link rear end now,
Yeah.
right?
But if you're that guy that you want a 3/4 ton, like at least it's fairly comfortable.
Correct.
I think you better explain what 5-link rear end is.
5-link is upper lower control arm,
Right.
upper lower link,
Right,
coil spring,
right.
and a panhard to keep the axle.
But still a
tight.
solid axle.
Still a solid axle.
Right.
So a panhard bar is 1 link,
So it's a multi-link rear suspension on a 1-ton or 3/4 ton truck.
3/4 ton. 1 ton does not have
On
that.
Ram,
Right.
that they've done that Ram 2500 since 14 has
14.
been.
So
this
it's more
coil
it's
spring.
more designed for maybe added travel, perhaps, and
Well, I think
I think it's
designed
ride
for comfort.
comfort. Yep.
So you can still tow a lot and carry a lot,
Right.
but it's ride comfort. But there's a big difference.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Technology's come a long way. Just like when in '99, when we first started seeing the Nivomat shock from GM, right? Where the shock actually shares load-bearing properties
Right.
with the coil spring at a certain ride height.
Right, mechanical
it
adjustment,
mechanically kind of knocks it back up and
Ratchets.
levels out
Yep.
the ride.
Yep.
Well, load leveling has been a big thing on the half-ton SUVs for
Right.
a long time.
A long time. Yep.
And they've how many things have they done, man? They went from like yaw sensors to position where like some of the navigators and expeditions used to work off the yaw sensor, so it'd reach a certain thing and it would
kick it up.
and it would kick it up
Yep.
once it passed the yaw.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. Should we explain what a Nivomat is? Because in the SUVs, this is kind of an important.
And I think it's still out there.
And while we're on Nivomat, I'm gonna throw this out there. I think it'll help consumers. If you have a 10 and up Grand Cherokee and you have a tow hitch on there from the factory, you have Nivomat. Our shocks in the rear do not cover
not a
Nivomat.
replacement. Yeah.
So unless you're not willing to convert it all the way, the shaft in our shock will be too small for your top mount assembly.
Right.
And what's a Nivomat?
What is a Nivomat?
It shares load bearing capability
Right.
with the actual coil spring.
But what does it look like?
That's the thing is before the first run of Nivomat, like in the GM Tahoes and Suburbans, you could tell.
Right. 4-inch
Because it
diameter
was like a
body. Yeah.
3.5-inch OD body.
Yep.
It had, you tore it apart. It had a big coil spring.
Spring
in there.
inside of it. Yeah.
Now, when you look at it,
It's visually the same.
it's visually pretty
Yep.
much the same.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Except
Yeah.
they use a much larger piston rod.
Right. I think
So-
they're using gas force as the ratchet.
No,
mechanism.
they still use it. There's still a heavy spring in
yeah,
there.
Okay.
So a Nivomat is basically looks like a shock,
Right.
but it has load-bearing characteristics.
Load bearing characteristics.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if you have
This was the OE's
if you have a Tahoe,
solution for towing.
if you have a Tahoe and you take the rear shock off it and you need a friend to help you pull it from under the truck, you have Nivomat.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the lower end load bearing. The higher end SUVs would have an air spring.
Air
Right,
springs,
right.
correct.
So you push a button on the dash and add a little.
Or no,
air.
you don't
No,
even
it's
push a button. It's all
Oh, it just automatically
Just works
does it.
off
Yeah,
of
yeah,
yaw
yeah.
pitch and roll sensors.
Yeah.
And the reason why they did that is because, like with an SUV, you really want to make it comfortable. You really want it to be comfy. not loaded.
Right.
And they have really soft springs, and you need to be able to
What's
raise
with
it
you
back
and
up.
soft springs?
Yeah.
I think you're right.
I don't
I
know.
think you're right. This is why guys with the Tahoes, this will help our consumers again. Tahoe is 99 to 2007 and a half. You had Nivomat in the rear. You changed your shock absorbers thinking you were doing a really good thing, which you are. And you take off this shock that weighs 700 pounds. Exaggeration, it probably weighs 30 pounds.
Replace it with a normal
And you
one.
replace it with a normal shock, and then you wonder why your
car sits 3 inches lower in the back.
That's the thing is it's load bearing enough to maintain ride height, but you get on the road and the spring is much softer because it shared
bounces
load
around.
bearing.
Yeah.
I actually think it drops the car an inch.
Yeah, it did. The car did
dropped it a
sag a
little
little bit.
I don't
but
think so.
The
But
ride.
here's the deal with a clapped out Nivomat shock.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Now
work.
you have the gas force in a 4600. You do not see a ride increase or decrease.
Decrease, yeah.
I could see that.
So now you don't have a change in ride height. And now you get on the road and the thing is like tucking and rolling.
Well, it just bounces.
Well, I got a hot tip for that. What did we do back then? And we still do it today.
So we have a kit that converts your Nivomat because it's a mechanical system. It's not going to cause dash lights. So we build a spring for the Suburban and the Tahoe that converts it to a full load-bearing coil spring that you can use with.
A 4600.
4600 damper. So
So it's a full rear kit.
I wouldn't
guys that
say
have
convert.
Nivomat.
It actually replaces Nivomat, and you swap out your OE springs for a heavier spring.
Which is converting it from Nivomat to
Yeah,
non-Nivomat.
yeah.
Yeah.
That works on those trucks. Now, let's Shane actually had something he wanted to talk about, but Junior cut him off earlier.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to talk about shock absorbers. We've had a few episodes on digressive valving.
Oh,
Right.
that's where shock absorbers. I really shouldn't have said that shock absorbers don't help with towing in the percentage because they
Now-
really do. The
now
digressive
you've
piston,
lit Shane up.
the digressive piston really does wonders in towing.
Right.
It really does.
And let's explain. So most of these trucks come with, let's go way back to the beginning of BILSTEIN. Why is BILSTEIN even here?
Gas pressurized monotube.
Gas pressurized monotube.
Yep.
So BILSTEIN is not the inventor, but the first company to bring the
Patent
decarbon
holder.
design.
Yeah. hmm
And did they buy the patent or?
It was a shared patent.
Shared patent.
Decarbone. Yep.
So BILSTEIN brought the monotube technology to market
Yep. To the
Back-
automotive market.
in the 50s.
54. Yep.
Yes. So that's BILSTEIN's claim to fame. But anyways, there's another type of shock out there called a twin tube shock.
Right.
And twin tube shocks have an inherent issue when they're cycling back and forth, and especially with a load. What happens to the oil in a twin tube shock that's not under pressure?
Turns to foam and they don't work.
Cavitates.
anymore. Yeah.
Cavitates.
Yep.
Oil turns to foam, it cavitates.
And you essentially have no damping.
Right.
And once this happens on your 1-ton Ram
Oh,
truck
yeah.
that weighs 8,000 or 9,000 pounds, and you're towing a trailer with cavitated oil,
Now you're in big trouble.
now you don't have any damping.
Right.
Like this is to the basics, right?
Right.
This is back to the basics. So the BILSTEIN monotube shock will not have cavitation because the oil's under direct pressure.
Right.
And now we have this digressive valving that we developed back in the 80s or something.
Right.
And it does a great job at controlling a heavy vehicle like that.
Our
Great job.
our colleagues in Europe like to call it higher power reserves in the dampening characteristics of the vehicle. Yeah.
It's very German.
Yes,
Higher
higher
power
power reserves.
reserves.
So you don't lose valving characteristics, and the gas pressurized monotube dissipates heat better and all that type of stuff. So
Yeah.
it kind of fits, but I like that. I like the way they.
But
work
it's
that.
very important. Basically, you're on most of these trucks, they come with, let's just face it, a cheap shock,
right.
right? I think the manufacturers are just trying to get through the test drive, right?
Right,
They want
right.
a comfy ride. So back to what
The guy bought the truck because
Junior said. They're looking. What, you're the driver? Or you're the passenger?
You're a driver or you're a commuter.
yeah,
commuter.
driver or commuter.
So they basically have this commuter tune on a twin tube shock that doesn't have much capability. The twin tube shock does not have higher power reserves,
Yes, it does not.
as our colleagues say in Germany.
Right.
And they're just trying to get you into the car, into the test drive. But as soon as you go use the car,
Put a trailer behind
put
it.
a trailer behind it, load it up, those twin tube shocks just don't work very good.
So the simplest thing the customer can do when they're working with pretty much any tow rig, with a lot of miles or without a lot
Set of
miles.
BILSTEINs.
Yeah, put a set of BILSTEIN.
And
on it.
here's
I
another
guess we
thing.
kind of
Here-
guess what? We just don't make off-road and lifted Bilsteins. We have
Stock
something
ride.
called a 4600.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Let's qualify that.
Right.
All of our dampers are purpose built.
Yes.
Okay. If you want to maintain stock ride height, that's why we build a 4600. We go to stock ride height on a 5100. Not all of them, but most of our 5100s go to stock ride height because there has to be a starting point, right?
Right. Right.
They're tuned a little bit more aggressively to handle the additional spring preload. So if you use them without spring preload, you can get a
weird ride.
not the desired ride.
Right.
If it was just as simple as putting that circlip to the bottom and doing 0 ride height on a 5100, we would absolutely stop making 4600 series shocks.
Right.
It would
But
not be in our best
You
interest.
can't do both. Not in one shock.
The at stock ride height with the spring, without the additional preload, it doesn't need that additional rebound control.
Right.
And you're going to get a better ride at stock ride height with a
4600.
They're not any better. As long as you want to increase ride height with our 5100 ride height adjustable, or our 6112, they don't tow any differently.
Right. What used in the proper ride height situations, the towing capacity would or feel would be the same. So if you tow with a 6112 at a higher ride height, you're going to get about the same feel as you would get on a 4600.
I do think, and this is just my thought, I do think that the 5100 on 3/4 and 1 ton trucks tow a hair better because they have about, on average, 100 more PSI of gas force in them.
Right.
So when the vehicle's squatted with a bunch of tongue weight, I think the 5100 actually works optimally.
Using the
in
gas spring
comparison
effect
to-
as a load leveler,
Correct.
if you will.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. So I think they do a little bit better on the feel, but the oil volume's such a plus on the 5160. And I doubt anyone could feel this in the seat of their pants, but that's some of the feedback I have from using a tow vehicle in the past with both of those shocks.
Right.
Well, let's talk about something really important. You mentioned leveling.
Right.
Now, trucks come with a rake,
Right.
right? They did that for a reason. So when
Right.
you put a trailer or put weight in the back, it levels it out.
Levels
right?
it out, right?
A certain amount of weight.
Right.
Which I think having a level vehicle when you're towing is like you have to have that.
Right. Otherwise, nose up, you can't really see over.
Well,
the
nose
hood.
up is it's really bad for gas mileage.
Steering.
The steering's really weird. It's
Light.
really, really detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
That's because the air is hitting the bottom of the bumper when it's supposed to be going around the bumper.
Over the top of the
Or
truck.
over the top of the truck. So you really need
It
at least a level
impairs
vehicle.
aerodynamics.
Yeah.
So a lot of people want to level their truck and put a bigger tire on and put on some different wheels or whatever it might be because it looks cool.
Right.
But in my opinion, you really need to lift the back of that truck to kind of or
I think depends
you
on
need
what
to do something to the back.
It depends
to level
on
it
what
Right.
it depends on what you're doing. Like if you're never, like most people with half-ton trucks will never tow with it.
Right.
But a lot of people do.
Right.
But
Especially
for those that do not, a level stance is absolutely fine. Even nose high.
It's fine,
You're going to lose a little bit of the aerodynamics
Right.
100%.
But I would
think-
say you've got a lot more work to do once you've leveled it out.
Right. Well, I think what Shane's point really says it. So if you're going to have a level stance without a load, then when you add the trailer, you need to maintain the level stance, right?
And this is why our friends in Africa and Australia, when they build vehicles that they tow with, you can buy any kit from Old Man Emu. You can buy any kit from any Australian manufacturer. And if it's a complete kit front and rear, the rear is always going to maintain the factory rake or more.
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought you were going to say they just stick a beer can between the axle and the leaf spring or something to level it out. But
Well, we have on the Ram 1500, we have a 1-inch leaf spring, 1-inch coil spring to kind of try to maintain a little rake when after you've leveled it out.
assuming that people were going to tow.
So if you've got like a 1500 or if you want to do a 5100, level it out, or if you want to do a 6112 and level it out, I recommend you lift the back an inch too.
Right, and that's a super good point because it's about Thanksgiving weekend here, the biggest desert weekend of the year, right? And I'm watching these toy haulers haul their extremely overloaded trailers out to the desert. And most of these trucks were lifted level to start with, right? Mostly F-250s, F-350s. And the truck set level before they put the fifth wheel on. And now they're headed out to the desert in high winds with the nose of the truck 4 inches higher than the back because they have 4,000 pounds of tongue weight.
And you know what that
in the
is?
back of the
You know what
truck.
that does to your steering? It unweights
it.
the front
Yeah,
end.
you can't steer.
And no,
The trailer is steering you at that point.
and this is where it becomes unsafe. You know, and
Right.
let's touch on this for real quick before we
Let's
get too
touch.
Let's do
deep.
not
Is the
touch.
Tacoma and the 4Runner crowd
Right?
that are extremely decorated,
They're decorated.
Are you talking about Overland Trend?
Overland trend.
that
Okay.
now they want to go out and buy a Airstream and have it
Or even a
wrapped to
small
match
toy
the
hauler.
vehicle.
22-foot toy hauler.
Yeah, or have it wrapped to match. All these little 4x4 are off-road campers that are coming out. There's
Right.
so many of them now that are a little higher. Now all these overlanders, they don't want to be in the tent anymore, but they'll keep the tent up there. But they
Right.
don't want to be in it anymore. They just want to be in the trailer with the family. Makes a lot of sense.
But they keep the tent.
Yeah.
They keep the tent.
That's for the kids.
Well, they
kids
got to
can climb up there.
You're not a
and
real
stuff.
overlander unless you unfold that thing when you get to your destination.
Yeah. Maybe it's for the dog. The
Yeah.
tent's for the dog.
Toss the kids up there or something, whatever it may be. So they're now have a tent on the roof, and they have a teardrop or some sort of off-road type, whether it's an old military thing or a new.
But let's just face it, it's a $40,000 tow behind trailer.
Right.
Exactly.
So now you have that. The vehicle, if it's a 4Runner, it's the 4-liter. If it's a third-gen Tacoma, it's a 3.5-liter. Those things probably are on 35s and not geared
Yeah.
and are struggling to maintain speed as it is.
Right. Now you put a trailer on the back.
Now you put a trailer on the back of that thing.
and your
and
ring
on the
gear
5
turns
on the 5
turns
link,
white hot.
on
when
the
you're
5-link
talking.
4Runner. The 5-link 4Runner now your 35s are inside the fender well. I mean, how do you make this safe? Like, I mean, there's bladders that you can put into the coil spring. But it's real tricky because now if on a leaf sprung Tacoma, do I go to Deaver and have them build me like an expedition pack that'll help with the tongue weight? Or do I use a weight distribution? Because when I'm not showing off my trailer, it's going to ride terrible.
Right.
You can't use weight distribution on an Overland trailer because
Right.
that knuckle that goes
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
which
The
ways.
multi-steer knuckle. So
Can't
as
do
soon
that.
as you try
So
to
now you
level
get
it,
an
it just
expedition leaf
eliminates-
pack built for it where you load it up
and
for
taking
the
the
tongue
kids
weight.
to soccer practice is horrible at that
And now
point.
you take it off and it's so rigid in the back, it's like doesn't move.
Yeah.
Almost like you just welded the pivot shackle.
Right. Yeah. It's,
You know what I
it's
mean?
tough.
And on the, I think I'd almost want to be in the 4Runner because I could take the bladder, or if I wanted to be cheap, I could just shove like a kid's football in the air
Yeah,
bag
exactly.
in the coil spring and air
A
it up.
volleyball. Put a volleyball
You know?
inside the coils.
And at least I could take that out or deflate it when I'm to my destination. That makes it really difficult, you know?
But why would you do any of that? The whole point is to go off-roading.
Right.
As soon as you like upgrade any
Shane,
of that stuff.
Shane. You know as well as I know that you got to pull up tough.
Yeah.
You got to hard part these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
You got to hard part these things. The trailer has the doors got to be open. You got to have your turf at the front door.
Yeah.
You got to have your porch light on.
Your chairs.
Kitchen out.
Yeah.
You got to have the
out.
kitchen out.
Yep.
You got and you have to have both of your Yeti coolers outside with your beer on the Yeti coolers.
Wait. Yeti coolers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're supposed to have a fridge freeze. There's no Yeti cooler.
Yeah.
You're supposed to have a fridge freeze and your
And-
solar panels out.
Yeah. Or fridge freeze.
Or
and-
Come
yeah,
on.
the tailgate
Let's
down
get-
and the fridge
Let's get real.
pulled out. Yeah.
Let's out and
Yeah.
and your solar panels with your red arc, they're charging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your
And
you
now
got
they
it on
have
your phone.
Starlink. Now they're going to have Starlink
Yeah,
up there so they
yeah.
can get internet. Like they don't have internet 3 miles off the freeway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's about as far as you got.
Well,
Correct.
So
I'm
you
gonna,
couldn't stand it anymore.
Exactly.
3 miles.
I'm going to go way back with a towing story that I have that most folks probably will appreciate really well. So if you're new to towing and you're watching a truck go down the road and they have this trailer ball with 4 different balls on it, right? There's they're facing all different angles, and there's one facing up that you hook the trailer to. Understand that there are different size tow balls, and some trailers take a 2.5 or 2 1/4 or a 3-inch. There's different tow ball sizes. Now, I went to the desert with a friend of mine who hauled a trailer, and he bought a tow ball at Home Depot, bolted it on his little drop bracket, and started hauling his trailer to the desert. Well, we got about halfway down Banner Grade, and the trailer bounced off the tow ball, and it's hanging from the safety chains, wobbling around behind his truck. He didn't read on the trailer tongue what size tow ball it needed, so he bought a 2-inch ball, and the actual tongue on the trailer was like a 2.5, so it just popped right off. As soon as he hit the brakes, it just popped right off, hit the bumper, and bounced off and went down the ground. So my first step with guys that are going to tow, make sure that the trailer ball size matches the ball hitch number.
Yeah, I'm not one, 100%. I'm not one to talk about like safety, because I think that's an overrated statement. Like I've seen what people drive around with.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen coils welded together to level out salvage cars. I've seen tires cut down to rubber grommets to build spacers. I mean,
Nice.
I worked down by the border for a long time, so I've seen everything imaginable.
Right.
But when it comes to towing, there's a lot of safety concern.
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
I had a 98 T100, wish I still had it.
That's a torsion bar
And
truck.
I was doing,
Are we back talking about Toyota?
I was doing,
yeah.
my dad was going to lay some concrete. So I leveled the side of the house, and he was going to have a concrete guy come and lay. And then he went and looked at his budget and said that the bricks would be better from Home Depot, be more cost effective.
Pavers,
So
yeah.
I went and got these pavers, and back in the day, they didn't give crap, So told the guy, load a couple pallets up on that T100 right there, pal.
Of
He's
course.
Like, and he's like, I shouldn't do this. No, I didn't go to Home Depot. I went to RCP,
Right.
Block and Brick.
Right.
I'm like, hey, put that thing up there. He's like, I shouldn't do this. He said, I shouldn't do one, let alone two. I said, put the two up there. he said, sign a waiver. I said, no sweat. Signed it. I could not steer this car home.
It's funny that you just told that story, because I did the same thing. I'm using pavers in my yard, and I have a 2005
T100?
a 2005 Tundra, basically the same truck, not torsion bars. And I Googled how many bricks does it take to overload the Tundra, and they're like 33 bricks, and they're 65 on a pallet, right? So you're basically, to achieve half ton, which is the truck, that's its weight carrying ratio, 33 bricks, which is half a pallet. And I see guys putting pallets
I put 2 pallets in a T100.
in
I
smaller
couldn't
trucks.
steer the car.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
So what
Literally
happened when you
couldn't
put
stop
that in
it or
there?
steer it.
What happened when you put those bricks in there?
Well, first of all, it was horrible, because if you buy 33, you have to haul them off the pallet one at a time and put them in the back of your truck. But it was fine.
You didn't do the whole pallet?
No, I did not do the whole pallet,
You're a
because
chump.
it was just, I just didn't want to do it.
You're a chump. I did 2 pallets of 66 bricks in a T100 with a 3.4 liter V6.
Did
and
it
a
make it
manual
home?
transmission. It sure did.
Yeah.
Didn't like not one bit of it.
You
but
said
it
you
made
couldn't
it.
steer.
No, I
so
couldn't steer.
How did you get
I couldn't
home?
brake either. I had to take the back roads.
So what happened when you had to put the 33 in there? 33,
It drove fine.
it drove fine.
Yeah.
My overloads on the T100 were inverted.
Yeah, he basically
Shackle was completely flattened
turned
out.
his springs inside
And the
out.
shackle was actually, at one point, I was like, what's that knocking noise? So I went back there, and the shackle was so far pushed back
It was hitting the frame.
that it bent the tabs that stop it.
Yeah.
And the shackle was hitting the frame.
Yeah. Yep. So super important is when it says half ton, make sure you calculate
Well, that
out
was,
how
see,
much
that's
a half
the
ton is.
T100 wasn't even a half ton. That was like a weird ton truck.
Quarter ton.
That was like a weird ton, right? It was like between a Tacoma and a Tundra type deal.
Yeah.
Tundra really is arguably, the first generation Tundra is arguably not even a half ton.
Right. Well, it said it could handle 1,300 pounds in the back of the truck, and the pallet was 3,200 pounds with all
Well,
the bricks on.
back in, when we came down to, when did we do the Tough Truck Challenge in Hollister?
I have no idea.
It was probably 2009 or 8.
Are you talking Top Truck Challenge?
Top
yeah.
truck or tough truck?
The 4-wheeler
Truck,
magazine
yeah.
Top Truck Challenge?
So we had a guy come from Guam that had a completely, and in order to get the vehicle in, we had to pick it up in Long Beach for him. And I did it with my Tundra. and I had Devers on the back with no overloads. And I said, I'll go. And I took the, what is that, 72 or 73? The
Toll road?
Toll road?
Yeah.
It's like the worst road in America to Long Beach.
It's a 73.
Overdrive off in second gear.
Oh, it's
he had
all
spare,
uphill. Yeah.
And he had spare 54s on the trailer.
Right.
That truck was pissed off.
And you had to drive to Hollister.
No, I drove it from, because we were going to prep it at the shop. So I drove it from Long Beach back to San Diego.
Right.
And I really shouldn't have even been towing the trailer. It was like a 3-axle. I shouldn't even been towing the trailer, let alone with weight on it.
Right.
Forget about it. With a Deaver mini pack, no overload spring.
Yeah, that's how you learn, right?
Yeah, you said the
That's
truck
how you
was
learn.
really angry. Did it make it? Did
Yeah,
it make the
it.
destination?
It's a Toyota.
It's a Toyota.
Of course
Yeah.
it made it.
So one thing we didn't touch on, a lot of folks, especially calls that we get, they outfit the truck fairly capable, but then they call us and say, should I add additional sway bar, more sway bar to the truck? Now, is that a factor in towing as far as you guys are concerned?
Absolutely. If you're going to be constantly towing, you got to understand that even though our shock absorbers may have that chassis feeling a little more stable, the job of a shock is not to control sway.
Right.
Even though our shocks do,
Up and
they
down
do a
movement.
great job
Yeah.
at controlling sway. That is the function of a sway bar.
Right.
Especially if you put like a truck camper on the back of it.
Oh yeah.
Right. Now you're talking high profile.
Especially
a
the
lot
big
of side to
fiberglass,
side.
like the Bigfoot campers, like that are all fiberglass. That, I mean, those things are heavy.
They're
And then
heavy
you
and
get
they're
that-
tall.
They're tall, and you get that really high.
Wind resistance.
Pass a big rig and it wants to suck you into the other lane type thing. Yeah.
Especially if you drive on a dirt road, you're going to go truck camping down a dirt road.
So
It's
sway
like-
bars are
It
also
blows
something.
my mind when I see these half-ton trucks with a Lance cab over.
It's crazy.
That's I know they're light. You know, Lance Light. That's
They're
the
not-
name.
They're not
that-
light.
they're
But
not-
yeah,
They're not light.
Yeah.
They're not light.
You need a
and I'm not
one-ton
talking about
truck.
the Lance that you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. Like
Right.
I'm talking a fully self-contained Lance camper that's
Right.
cab over,
right.
Hanging off the back.
hanging off
Yeah.
the back. The tailgate's
Four,
gone,
4 feet off the back. Yeah,
and they have it cinched down on the sides with these
chains.
like
Equipment they got at Home Depot.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Mounting chains.
and you see it going down the road, and this thing is just oscillating.
It's just wallowing.
if I'm with someone that's driving by that, I tell them
Get in the other lane.
get away from this guy.
So a sway bar would help.
Sway bar,
Sway bar
helps.
would help with the sway, but again, we don't want people to overload the trucks with gigantic campers that aren't designed for them. Although we do see that. Yeah, I was curious about that. We got a lot of calls on Tech Line, and folks did the right maneuvers as far as shock absorbers, but they were calling to say, is your shock designed to work with a heavier sway bar? And the answer would be yes. I mean, the sway bar isn't really
Depending. If it goes to stock location, absolutely. There's
Right.
a lot of sway bars that will reroute because the stock location doesn't work anymore because
Right.
it's large.
now it could interfere
Now
with the shock.
it could interfere with shock.
Right.
100%.
As far as like actually
As far as fitment,
Right.
as far as
Right.
packaging.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, you got to be careful with packaging. I've seen, especially
Yeah.
like on Jeeps when they do that.
Yeah, like the Curry-Annie sway. And,
Yeah, a lot of times they'll run into the shocks. or
Curry-Annie
something.
rock and the
Which is a long travel sway bar, which we wouldn't get into on a tow vehicle. It's designed for a
Well,
complete.
believe it or
We're
not,
just
that
making a
Curry,
point
yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
believe it or not, that Curry-Annie rock can get pretty aggressive.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
why it has the adjustability
Yeah.
to be loose or to be super tight.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, it's a good solution.
But especially on the rear axle, sway bar goes in around the vicinity of the shock. So
Right.
you need to like.
Yeah.
The link mounts and all that could really get.
And remember,
problem.
a lot of the shocks that come on stock trucks, like if you're talking about a Tacoma, they're 36 millimeter. So going to a 46 millimeter monotube is not a big deal. But if you're rerouting a sway bar or going from a 22 millimeter to a 28 millimeter sway bar,
Now the chance.
you got to just make sure it packages right.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Just take a look.
Yeah, take a look. You should be
Exactly.
fine.
Test fit everything.
You should
check
be
everything.
fine, but take a look.
Exactly. Well, that should be the rule on every automotive
Mm-hmm.
part installation. Is you should kind of look at things before you drive it down the road, right? Just don't bolt it on and hope it's in the right position and
And,
tighten it down
and
right.
let's touch on real quick the guys that tow with their RVs that don't even know we make RV shocks.
Yeah, we were gonna save that for later, and I
Yeah.
guess it's later. So
Yeah.
let's talk about RV shocks.
So we make shocks. We make shocks for diesel pushers. We make shocks for Class A, Class B, Class C.
Van cutaways.
Van cutaways, the top kicks. We make shocks for them.
Yep.
So,
And not just when they're towing, even, for a guy who's
Correct.
not going to use it
Correct.
for towing.
Well, I mean, those are weighted down vehicles, so
Right.
they need a good monotube
Right.
shock for that.
well, we find that guys that tow with RVs, outside of getting the exterior detailed, the interior detailed, the maintenance is on dampers are often overlooked.
Right. They
Yeah.
park it for 5 years, jump back in it after it's been
And when you have an RV, you guys people got to understand it. Just sitting in your driveway, not moving, is just as much wear on a shock absorber as it's being driven
it.
down the street.
Yeah, because it's high pressure, right? So those seals are just dying.
So
They're trying to.
if you have a motorhome, likely we have coverage for it. And this is what separates us globally from any other shock manufacturer. We get a lot of guys that come in, when we're at like shows that favor automotive, like sport compact cars, and hey man, you don't make anything for the Acura, you don't make anything. Well, you only make things for BMW. Like we have our hands in so many different products that it's safe to say that we have more coverage globally than any other shock manufacturer in the world. This is why we're not making 4.5-inch off-road shocks, because we're busy making shocks for your wife's BMW and kits for your wife's BMW, or we're making stuff for your motorhome.
Right.
So that's a large reason why we're not always first to the market or always have the big stuff in one segment.
Yeah.
Right? Is because we're touching everything.
Well, when I did hot rod, I noticed that a lot. I talked to folks, and they'd come in and go, "Yeah, we trailered our hot rod down here, and we towed it down here with the E350 van cutaway. And the hot rod rides great because it's got your shocks, but the motorhome rides like, So what do we do for that? And we're like, hey, well, we make shocks for your motorhome too. But they didn't even realize that we had a product like that. It was really neat. In those days, I'd carry a few different models for motorhomes with me to the shows, and we'd sell them those shocks, go out and install them on their motorhome, and the guy would call me on his way home and say, it was amazing just switching from,
100%.
shocks that had.
And you know what I tend to get the
300,000
most
miles.
on is how much, like the F53 chassis, that is probably the biggest difference, and the E chassis.
Right.
The guys will put these shocks on their F53 coach, and they'll be like, this transformed it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they even put even the cheapest shocks on that coach.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They don't even do ride work.
It transformed it. It went from an oscillating, porpoising motorhome down the freeway to settling it down. And that's what a shock absorber will do. It is intended to control that chassis.
And I don't think a lot of people realize that the same engineering and ride work that we do on an off-road racing damper or the damper for your Tacoma or any other vehicle, we do that on motorhomes as well. We don't just run the stock shock on the dyno and then copy it. We actually ride work motorhomes. It's really weird that we would spend that much time on a motorhome shock, and we try to mimic the different weights that vehicle would be, full of water, not full of water, all the different ride characteristics.
And some we even make a comfort valving for guys that don't drive loaded.
Well, we developed a completely unique piston for the motorhome market. Remember the Comfy Track piston? That's still in our motorhome shocks today. A little bypass.
Check valve, bypass.
Check valve, yeah.
And another thing
Digressive.
that I must mention while we're talking about RVs and motorhomes is, if you don't see it in our catalog, it doesn't mean we do not make it. We do work hand in hand with a lot of RV companies like Source Engineering,
Right.
that actually make the big 60 millimeter shocks for Spartan chassis, for Monaco, for all these bigger diesel pusher chassis. We have Source Engineering that buys 60 mil components from us, and they put shocks together. You know what I mean? So if it's not in our catalog, it means we don't make it, but it doesn't mean there's not a BILSTEIN product out there available.
Well, if it wasn't for the 60 millimeter motorhome shocks, we wouldn't have 60 millimeter light truck shocks.
Yeah, 6112 came from that.
Shane saw a 60 millimeter warm form tube that was in the building for motorhome development. He's like, I want to make an off-road shock out of that. And that's where it came from. So literally the heritage for all of our 60 millimeter products comes from the motorhome segment. It's a pretty neat story when you think about it.
Yeah.
and it worked phenomenal.
It does. It's amazing how well it worked.
Yeah.
Hey, so before we wrap up, a lot of like we said, a lot of people call the tech line or at shows or whatever. They always ask you. We answered one question about the sway bar. Hey, if I buy this, will it work with that? We'll work with your shocks if I do this, if I do that. One thing. So we covered the sway bar. The airbags is a big thing.
Right.
Will your shocks work if I have an airbag? And we've tested on a lot of different on the 1-tons at least, with campers and towing, and yeah, that obviously your spring's deficient when you put a heavy load on it, but when you level it back up with the airbag, the aggressive pistons do a good job at lending themselves towards that.
Right.
So,
And I should add this. It's a little easier to understand than what you just said.
Okay.
You were using like heavy words that aren't.
Heavy words.
So an airbag, an air spring, an additional load, a load assistance airbag, that is this is the way they operate. So so if you have a trailer pull or a gooseneck, air those things up to 85 PSI and bleed them till your vehicle is back level.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The easy way, because you can't air, these things are a nightmare to air up when the tongue weight's already on them, right? Now, understand that these are not intended to increase your ride height with no load. They're not intended to increase your ride height with load.
Right.
So those that are thinking, oh, I got airbags, so I need a longer shock, that's absolutely negative.
Right.
Because the shock you should not be achieving additional ride height with that air spring.
And that's what Shane was trying to say, and I'll reiterate it, is that make sure that the damper is in its recommended position. You're not raising the vehicle with airbags. And again, I think we touched on this too. As soon as the trailer is not on the vehicle, let the airbag down to the minimum pressure to get your ride back.
So this is a big one. What should I run, a 5100 or a 4600? Because I just put airbags in the back of my half-ton pickup.
And what's the answer?
The answer is this: if you intend on leveling the front end with a 5100, put a 5100 on the back.
Right.
If you're not going to level the front, put a 4600. So here's the deal, guys. There are minor differences in 5100 0-1 versus a 4600. On the rear. We simply built this shock so you have something that aesthetically matches your 5100 or your 6112 in the front. You could put this 5100 on the back, but essentially it's the same shock. There's no more
component-wise.
There's no more duty. Yeah. There's no duty difference between them.
Right.
You're not getting a heavier duty shock in the 4600. That's old nomenclature. The HD shock's old nomenclature. We don't go by that anymore. But there's no duty difference in the 4600 over the 5100. They're both a monotube design shock that is specific to your application.
Right.
In the rear.
Right.
In the rear.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's important information as well. So
a lot of people would call up and they'd say, I put a 2-inch lift on my truck that has a service bed or a truck camper.
Right.
And then they're looking, and that was so to level out the back.
Right.
Right. So I lifted it 2 inches to basically level it back up.
Right.
And then they think they need a 2-inch lift shock.
Right.
That happens a lot too.
Right.
Yeah.
And service bed's a whole different animal. We might have to cover that because now the shock mounts have been moved and things like
not
that.
typically on service
and
bed.
while we're on this topic about rear shocks, for those of you guys that are out buying Super Duties used and Dodges used, and you guys look under there and you see a 2 or a 3-inch block kit and you assume that it's lifted 3 inch, it's not.
Right. Don't measure the lift block and tell us that you got a 3-inch lift.
Those blocks are likely factory.
Right.
So if you look under there and you see a block, Ford especially, and Ford's easy to know because most aftermarket blocks outside of a couple fabricated
don't have bump ears.
They don't have the bump tabs coming off of them. And most lift manufacturers will stack a block underneath it. So if you have 2 blocks stacked, the amount of lift you have is the block that's underneath the factory
The
block.
second one, yeah.
I think they refer to that as stock lift.
Stock lift, yeah.
Everybody, there's no such thing as stock lift.
Well,
that's just stock ride height.
Well,
it's not stock
There
lift.
are a few.
Yeah.
Stock lift?
Dodge Ram off-road package,
Yeah.
like 2000, 2001. That off-road package was taller.
But it's just stock.
stock,
Is he talking
but it
about
won't
the
take a
Lone Wolf
4600
McQuade
series.
truck?
It won't take a 4600 series shock.
Well, I mean, a power wagon will.
Yeah, the power.
Yeah,
But
wagon.
it's
Power
still
wagon,
stock.
yeah.
It's not stock lift.
Right.
It's just
just
stock.
stock.
It
I don't
cannot-
know. That's an argument for
Another
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should do an episode on and I'm just mentioning it on the weird vehicles.
Yeah. That would.
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Because a lot of people have questions on this.
We'll
the
put
mega
it on the
cab,
calendar.
1500 mega cab,
The
8 lug
weird
mega cab.
vehicles.
You have the 2000
Play the Twilight
2001
Zone music.
half-ton Ram 4-wheel drive with the off-road package. Thing was, you put for 35s on them stock.
How about the 7-lug F250?
Seven lug-
Exactly.
Or the 7-leg light duty F-250. Yeah, that monstrosity. Yeah, we could talk about that.
You know what? Maybe I should have picked that as my overland.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
stop
the-
it. Stop
Oh man.
Yeah, but when guys came in and they would like want to lift these monstrosities, these F-250 light duty, and they in the computer automatically printed out, FabTech 6-inch for F-150. I don't have an F-150. Yes,
yeah, you do.
Yeah, you absolutely do. Yeah. So we should actually have a session that's talking about these weird one-offs and how to address them.
Yeah, we'll put
Because
it
I
on the
think
calendar. Yeah.
I think that a lot of people don't even realize they have some one-off machine that
like
they
a
probably
Kia
should,
Borrego.
yeah, like they probably should either trade in or something. You know,
All right, I'm switching my overland car to light duty F250.
Just
Don't
so
do
we
that.
can cover that, right? Yeah.
Why would you want a torsion truck?
I don't know.
I just want to run it through the bushes on the way to Flagstaff. That's what I want.
Exactly. He wants to kill it. So there's one less on the road.
All right, so join us next time for our weird vehicles
Yeah.
episode.
And on this episode, if you guys have comments or anything that you want us to touch on for next time, let us know in the comment section. Again, we thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Shock Talk.
Toe safe.
Toe safe.